famous woolly booger. Here we have it in red. Another couple popular colors are olive, black, white, chartreuse. Lately here we've been tying these a lot in the red and in the black. Today and yesterday with these new stock trout, water seemed to be a little bit clear, and this red seemed to be doing very well. So as I had one tied up in the vise here, it looked like it did pretty good on the camera. So I'm going to stick with this red, which you can tie this in multiple colors. You don't necessarily have to have only the red. We're just going to do this here for the camera purpose and this lesson today. This woolly booger here involves a size 10 or a size 8 hook, which is a double length in shaft. I'll show you here in a second what that means. It has a marabou tail. The body consists of a red chenille. It's like a pipe cleaner, but it's very flexible. It doesn't have the wire inside of it. And here then we also have a wire that we wrap around our saddle hackle here that protects the fibers from the teeth that the fish, once they start grabbing onto it, they can easily damage that feather, and then it can just come all unraveled. And what that wire does there, it just saves that life of that fly and lets you continue on fishing it throughout the day. That's if you don't get it snagged in a tree or on rocks or on your fisherman next to you there, next to his hat or whatever. I don't know who writes this stuff, I'm just saying it. So let's just go ahead on. I'll show you how to tie the famous woolly booger. What we're going to do is we're going to get our hook, and you can see how that shaft right there, that shank on that hook is very long. That's what that means by double X. If you have, which I don't have here on my desk, a standard hook, the standard hook, this here would probably, your hook eye would probably be down here. And with it being the double X, it's double extra long. And that's what gives us our body of our fly. We are going to start our thread. And while our thread started, if you notice, I didn't start my thread all the way here at the eye of the hook. I started it back a little bit because that right there is going to be the zone where I do not want to tie any material into, because I do not want to crowd this eye of this hook, because we're going to be putting in the chenille, we're going to be tying the wire, we're going to be tying the hackle, all there at the point of that hook. And with those materials, I do not want to cover that eye of that hook up. So what I do is I stop myself, and it's always a good habit of I only tie material on where I tie my thread onto my hook. And if I leave that spot, that's just a good reminder for me. I'm sure you can do other things as well, but that's a good reminder for me to stop my material there. Once you get your thread base started, you want to take that thread base all the way down to where the hook is starting to bend. Once you have your thread base down, we're going to grab a clump of our marabou here. You can see this one here has 3 or 4 little stems in it. It's a few different feathers, but we're only going to be concentrating on using the tail of this marabou feather. You can see how fluffy this all is. But once you get all this up together here, to make your tail, you can see how fluffy that really gets. It's very light. And what I like to do is when I tie this on, I like to measure my material first. So I measure where my fingers are pinching onto the marabou, and I always touch it to the eye of the hook. And I want it to go a little bit longer than the hook itself. So you can see where the hook is buried up underneath there. That way there, I have a guide to every time I go to tie my flies, they'll always be tied the same way. So I'll measure my material, transfer that material measurement back to the back of the hook. I transfer my fingers over, doing a pinch wrap. And then I tie the material down with like medium tight. You don't want to go super tight here because you can start bringing the material around. I like to try to keep my material on the top of the hook, and you go about 3/4 of the way up, and then cut that marabou off. That's all we're going to be using of that tail. Get this here all nice and tied down tight now. This is all really tight. You can see how I'm really bending that hook down. Get that tied all down tight. And then stop about halfway through the shank of your hook, because that is where we are going to tie on our wire. Some people use wire, some people don't. I don't know if that's available to you. But if you're going to use it, use the wire. I tie this here right on the length of what I just tied on to my marabou. I'm making sure that I do not put anything up here into the front of this hook. Get this wire tied down. Then leave that wire hang out the back. Now what we're going to do next is we're going to get some of our saddle hackle. And you can see how all these fibers are facing forward, or facing one direction. What I like to do is I like to grab the tip of that feather and get all these fibers and palmer these fibers all back to where you can see how it's getting, the feather is actually getting a little bit fluffier. I'm pulling these fibers back away just so they stand out wider, not thinner. And once you get to the top where your two fingers are going to meet, you want to get the tip of this feather here, and this is the part that we're going to tie right onto the hook. Tie that right over where you tied your wire on, making sure we're not to the eye of that hook. You can see how I'm getting a little close to the eye of that hook right there, so I'm just going to cut that material right off right there. Get all that tied on. Now we're going to go all the way back to the hook again, back to the bend of the hook, and we're going to get this. We have a cluster of material back here. We have the marabou, which is the tail. We have our wire that's back here. We have our hackle that's back here. Now we're going to put our chenille back there. Again, you don't want to put your chenille here and then have it covering up over the eye of the hook. So I take it back right behind to where I started tying my thread base in, and I tie my chenille down. Now you're going to notice here when you're tying this down, it really doesn't look like you're tying it down, and the stuff that you're doing is you're capturing it under your thread, and it's looking all sloppy, it's looking all messy like that. Nothing looks neat. Don't worry about that, because we're going to cover all that up here with the next step. Once you get all this tied down, now what we're going to do is we're going to get into the process of moving all this material from the back. We're going to move it towards the front. So we're going to bring our thread all the way up to where our thread base started. Right there, you can still see that I have a nice little plain hook shank right there. Then we're going to go ahead and we're going to start with our chenille, because this is the last thing that we put on the hook. In the orders that we do it, we tie the first thing that we tie on the hook is the last thing that we're going to use. So this is the last thing that we tied in on the back, so this is the first thing we're going to use. What we're going to do is we're going to wrap this material over the top, underneath, comes back up towards you, and back up over the top, touching the next wrap. So we're going to cover this hook completely up with this material as we work our way to the front of the hook. So once you get it up here, this is where you can start really covering up this eye of this hook here. And this is, I'm going to say this a couple more times, and you'll get sick of me saying it, but once you get this tied on, you're going to see why I mentioned that so many times. It's just way too easy to cover up the eye of the hook on this fly. So I do 3 or 4 wraps there, and then I'll do 3 or 4 wraps in front of it. Pick this up in the air here, not bringing the material down here to cut it, because then I have a real good chance of damaging my thread and cutting this off. If I cut this up here, I lay the hook or the scissors right down on top and cut. I do not have any chance of really damaging my thread right there. And if you notice, you can start getting close to the eye of that hook, but it's still out there. Now, when we do our hackle here, our hackle is the next step that we're going to tie. We tied this chenille here in one direction. The bottom of it came down towards us, and then the top went away from us. What we're going to do in this step here, we are going to do this here the opposite direction. We are going to bring the material towards us, away from us at the bottom, and then towards us at the top. Candy caning this hackle all the way to the front. You can see we're not touching wraps. There's some space in between there. Bringing that all the way up to the front. And once you get about right at the end of that chenille that you tied on, don't let go of your hackle. Capture it with your thread. And then I always like to grab all the material in the front, swoop it back, give it a few threads, few thread wraps, and then cut that off. Okay, so now the reason that I did my hackle the opposite direction is because this wire here that we're going to do it in a counter wrap way. What I mean is we tied the chenille in one direction, then we tied the hackle in the opposite direction. Now we're going to tie this wire in the opposite direction of the way we just tied our hackle in. The purpose of this is as you're candy caning this up through, not trying to get a lot of your hackle fibers underneath the wire. You're counter wrapping over top of the stem of that hackle fiber, and it really protects it from the fish's teeth when they bite it. It really extends the life of this fly. And once you get it up there, you get it to the front, you capture it with 3 or 4 turns, feather everything back, give that 3 or 4 more turns. Now we want to cut the wire. Some people go ahead and spin it and helicopter everything off, or you can get your scissors and cut it off. But if you're using your scissors, please do not use the tip of your scissors, because that's pretty much where we always cut our materials from, our threads from, and we do not want to damage that part of the scissors. We want to use the wire, and we want to cut that back all the way into the back of the scissors. So we'll dedicate this spot back here of the scissors just for wire cutting. That way we aren't damaging our tools, and we're making them last a long time. Then we'd sit there and cover the wire that we had, that we just snipped off. And this is where you would see that spot that I had dedicated to where I wasn't tying anything on. I'm tying a nice little thread base right there. so it can be a nice little taper, and I'm covering everything off that I have tied on there at the end. This is where you can do your knot, or you can go ahead and use your whip finish tool to finish off. And there you have a finished woolly booger in red. Again, you can tie these in olive, you can tie these in black and white, you can use a silver thread, you can use a gold thread. I've seen people actually use fishing line in there to make that finish off. So make it your own sizes, make it your own colors. You can mix up the tail with white, you can make the body black, you can change the feathers to black, you can make this thing 3 different colors if you wish. It really doesn't matter. Make it the way you know you feel comfortable fishing it. Make it a confident fly, and please do not cover the eye of that hook. You can see how nice and clean that is. It's going to be very easy to tie onto, and no issues at all when you're out on the stream. There you have it, your finished woolly booger.